just before I turned 30, I was raped, unfortunately, and the process within the religion is that you go to the elders. And when I went to the elders, they took me through what is called a judicial process, and I was punished, essentially. Now, the terminology they use internally is that I was disciplined, but essentially they disbelieved me and said that, look, we need to decide whether you are clean enough to remain in the congregation. And for me as a young woman, having abstained I had abstained.
Right.
I had done all of the things that you were meant to do. I was a good daughter, a good sister, a good member of the congregation. I was not on the edge of the congregation. I didn't live a double life. It was the best way I can describe it. It was a heartbreak. I felt heartbroken. I felt completely abandoned, detached from God, and everything I had been taught about faith and identity in relation to that, it was completely destabilized. It changed me on a cellular level. The trauma, the pain, the emotional pain, the spiritual pain. It changed me on a cellular level, and I then had to make a decision. Do I remain in this religion and be, recorded as a sinner, even though someone harmed me, or do I leave? And of course, leaving had consequences because my entire life was in that religion, friends, family, etc. And I'd never lived outside of the religion either. So if I left, it would require me to build a new life. But equally, it might mean that my family members may stop speaking to me depending upon the decision that the elders were going to take. Because one of the disciplines is that you can be what in mainstream Christianity would term excommunicated. But the consequence of that back then would be that your family could not speak to you. And so there were some important kind of decisions I had to make about, am I going to honor my dignity, or am I going to obey these invisible contracts in order to be accepted and be deemed to be worthy of God's forgiveness for a sin that I don't believe I even committed?
Right.
Yeah.
So how did your family respond to you?
I'm incredibly fortunate that our relationship now is the strongest it's probably ever been.
Wow. Okay.
But there was no guarantee of that. I understood when I made these decisions, about leaving, that I'd already gone through a grieving process already. And so I had prepared myself for a life whereby my family may not have contact with me, may not talk to me, or the relationship would materially change on an emotional level. I'm incredibly fortunate that that has not happened, but I prepared myself for that mentally when I made the decision to leave.
Yeah. Okay, so you leave.
Yes.
You start, whether you knew it at the time or not. I'm assuming you probably didn't, because that's the way things go.
Yes.
That you're constructing, you're creating this life as an unpunishable woman.
Yes.
So what does that look like? I mean, when you first left, because I mean, at this point, and I don't know with Jehovah's Witnesses how. I have a really good friend actually who's a Jehovah's Witness, and she's very successful.
Yes.
So you're obviously in your career at this time. I know you owned a business at once upon a time. So tell us a little bit about that, and then how we're transitioning.
Oh, my goodness. So, and that's even an interesting. The decisions I made, even on a professional level, from that year onwards. If I wasn't traumatized, I probably wouldn't have made some of those decisions at all, to be honest. So after that, in that year, I went on to open a coffee shop. So one of the things, I'd always wanted to do was open a coffee shop. So I opened the first independent coffee shop in the area I grew up in for something like 25 years. Very poor decision.
Yeah.
Because if anyone knows anything about the coffee shop business, bricks and mortar businesses, incredibly hard, right, to get off the ground and take them to a profitable place. And so, fortunately, I had business interests and pursuits outside of my religion, which again, I've always probably looking back broken the rules, because in that religion before you weren't allowed to pursue higher education, but I went to university. It was a necessity for me. And then I've always been interested in business. And so fortunately, even with leaving the religion, I had something to occupy me. And in many ways, it kept me focused. I could kind of almost freeze the pain. from the whole leaving religion thing and focus wholeheartedly on running that coffee shop business. And so that's what I started to do. And then, of course, the pandemic came along and I made a decision to shut that coffee shop because I knew I could make more money going back to consulting, which is what I was doing before I opened the coffee shop. And so I made sure that I kind of transitioned back into consulting.
What kind of consulting? Because it's so funny, because I've been on this kind of everybody's a consultant. I consult, right? But I know, and as Black women especially, we are so diverse. We are so amazing. And a lot of people are like, you can consult. I'm the consultant, and you're just going to go out here and consult. And so what kind of consulting do you do? I know you're into sales.
I sell cultural transformation and strategy, essentially, to corporate organizations. So that's always been my thing. And the modalities that we tend to offer once we're inside that organization is training, coaching, advisory work. I tend to do a lot of C-suite briefings, looking over a lot of the culture strategies that they want to develop, learning and development strategies, that kind of thing is really that's my bread and butter.
Yeah. So this is what I was going to ask you that slipped my mind. So where are you mentally with, can I ask you, with your faith, because this is a big one, with Black women, especially. I feel something's happening with us, and, not necessarily with just Jehovah's Witnesses, but as well in the Black church, the Christian church, Black Christians in, here in the U.S.
Yes.
Where are you on that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's two things I'll say in terms of what I feel right now. I do still believe in a God. And I know that's very unpopular to say these days, but I do still believe in a God, but I would not regard myself as religious. And it's so funny, when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, there's a very clear delineation between a practicing Jehovah's Witness and someone who's not. And so that's why for me, I always say I'm not religious, because I'm not actively practicing any religion, right? I'm not a member of a church officially or any religion, but I do still believe in a God. I think also where I'm at, and obviously this plays into my work, I do believe that religion is a system of power. And I think religion and spirituality and faith are different things. I think religions that operate in an organized way, have a legal entity, they are systems of power, and ultimately they are there to retain their power over people. And a lot of rank and file members of religions don't realize that, because when you are brought into that organization, any organization, the angle is usually about your faith, right? And you and God, but you are unaware that it's an entire organization that operates like any other secular organization. It's registered with the government. There are tax benefits to them. They have a lot of money. And I think the Black church, obviously here in America, you can see more of that on the outside. But actually in the religion I came from, you can be an everyday publisher and completely unaware about the level of wealth that religion actually has, and you might be struggling day to day yourself. And of course, and so for me, I do believe that religions operate like systems of power, especially when they are male-led, and when the leadership and authority is male-led, and where women have no voice either in any of the ways. So for example, the judicial process I went through, there is never any kind of there's not a feedback box. Right, so bearing in mind it's a religion where the majority of the members are women, which means that the majority of the members are women who go through this judicial process. But nobody's coming to check what the experience was like. Was it done fairly, ethically? What the impact on your mental health is? There's just no check and balance on that, right? And so you end up as a woman being alone in a room with men, being questioned about whether or not your rapist ejaculated on you. And nobody is checking for this. Nobody cares. There's no consequences, nothing, right? That is allowed. It's permissible. And in fact, if you do try to escalate, which is quite difficult, quite frankly, if you want to complain, that's not a thing. You are navigating a system of power and a system of hierarchy. That's what you end up navigating, which is very different in reality to what you're sold, which is that it's all about your relationship with God. He's loving, he's there for you, he cares for you. But actually with something like that, which is very real and has a real impact on your mental health, your sanity, like I say, your dignity, there is no check and balance whatsoever. So for me, I'm not interested or inclined in joining a religion to have to navigate another system of power in that way.
Yep. Did you go to therapy after that?
I did. It was absolutely necessary eventually. I think, at first I just thought I'll figure this out, because having gone through a process where you, like I say, you're sitting before men who are telling you that they can make a decision as to whether you're clean enough to remain in the congregation. When you've been told that, this is how God sees you, right?
Yeah.
You're the one who's done something wrong in God's eyes. I did not have the bandwidth, quite frankly, to go and speak to somebody else about what had happened to me. In fact, for about 2 to 3 years, I spent most of the time praying for humility, because based on my Bible knowledge, I really didn't see what the scriptural grounds were for me to be punished when somebody had harmed me. And so I was praying for years that I would see the error of my ways, and I would understand how they had come to their conclusion in terms of the way they treated me and the decision that was actually made. So I did not even really process the original injury for years, because my entire attention and focus was on being accepted in this religion as clean. So it was about 3 years really until the first time I really went into trauma therapy and had to sit for the first time and grieve what had originally happened to me.
So did you talk to the elders or the men of the church because your attacker was a member of the church?
But you have to. So, and this is what you're encouraged to do. And it's ironic because even to this day, if you speak to members of that religion, they'll say you did the right thing. Right? So the culture and the process is that anything that happens like that in your life, you need to go and speak to the elders. And ideally what they sell you is that the elders are shepherds, and so they're there to shepherd you, right? And so the idea is that they will help you, comfort you, but that's not what happened to me at all.
Yeah, obviously.
That's not what happened to me at all whatsoever.
So this is something I think we struggle with because, I was raised as a Christian. I consider myself a Christian, but I'm spiritual. I'm not religious, but am I a Christian? So I feel like I'm kind of on the fence these days, right? I used to be very involved in my church. You see things, things, and you're just like, nah, so when you were making the decision, you said before you were attacked, you had no, you weren't even thinking about it.
Not at all. In fact, even when this all happened, I had no intentions of leaving. It was really because of the shock and the doubling down that the organization did around taking me through a judicial and disciplining me, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. It was the fact that my mental health had sunk so low. I'd gone to a point where I could barely function some days. And so I thought, this can't be correct. I don't believe, it's either this is a very cruel God, and I'm experiencing his wrath, even though I don't think I deserve it, but I'm not sure because God knows all things. So I must have done something, even though I don't know what it was. It was at a point where I thought maybe I fell asleep during the attack, because I don't remember consenting. I didn't invite this person to do this to me. Yeah. So maybe I fell asleep. Literally, I thought I was losing my mind.
Yeah.
And so I had even when they disciplined me and they said, look, this is the consequences. What happens is there's 3 levels to the discipline, and they will put you on a review process. And so for 3 months they were reviewing my behavior, and they were looking for me to show that I was repentant for what I had done. And so then at the end of the 3 months, you go back to the elders and they basically tell you what their thoughts are. And when I got there, bearing in mind, I was barely getting out of bed some days. Sure. And I still was going to all of the meetings. I was still going out on the ministry. So I was doing all the worship activities that were expected of me. Okay, I got to the review meeting after 3 months and they said, you haven't demonstrated enough spiritual maturity. And it was at that point, at the 3-month line, I remember a voice in my body. It was an all over voice that said, you need to leave and get to safety now. This has gone too far. So it was really in that moment when, even when I'd done everything I could in the midst of fresh trauma, they were saying this isn't good enough.
Right.
And that's when I decided, begrudgingly, it wasn't like I was looking forward to it. I was happy about it. I didn't know what the next steps would be for me. But I remember that voice coming through saying, you need to leave and get to safety. And it was another, I'd say, 10 months before I stopped going to the meetings entirely.